In one of my previous videos, I tested my red label Akto against my red label Soulo, and Akto actually came out top. Today it's actually up against my black label Soulo, and also it's up against the Hilleberg Unna. Now, I know I'm mixing labels between red and black, but at the end of the day, who hasn't considered doing that? And I know that I'm mixing freestanding, i.e. the Unna and the Soulo, against the tunnel design of the Akto. But at the end of the day, I've also on many occasions tried to consider, right, do I want freestanding or do I want tunnel? So there's a lot of considerations with the tents, so let's go ahead and break this down into a bit more detail. Now also the choice of tents, I have to review what I can get my hands on. So I own the two red tents and I've borrowed the Unna. So Gary Rowlands, thank you very much for lending me this Unna in this comparison. And finally, just regarding the choice of tents for this review and talking about the red label, black label thing and also the pros and cons of each tent. One of my current subscribers actually recently ordered a Soulo black label, but then actually changed his mind and decided to go for an Akto. So just really to let you see that, you know, the choice of tents between all the different labels, freestanding design or tunnel, is always a difficult choice, and I think we all can fluctuate between them. Now, all of these designs have particular strengths and weaknesses. The Soulo is definitely the strongest and most durable. The Unna is definitely the most spacious and actually very, very versatile. And Akto here is absolutely the lightest, but you are, and very easy to put up, but you are sacrificing a little bit in interior space. So I'm not really sure if I am actually going to try and pick a winner. So I might even have three alternative endings where each one actually wins for certain scenarios. So first of all, I usually look at tent design. So tunnel here, which needs to be pegged out, you know, in order to actually get the tent erected. But I have actually pitched this on sand, but if you're going to pitch it in sand or snow, you'll need sort of sand or snow stakes, and you'll need sort of boulders maybe. If you only have the little normal DIC pegs, you'll need boulders or something to put over the top of those. But at the end of the day, it can actually be done, but it takes a bit more time. So the freestanding design of the Unna and Soulo just make them both easier to pitch in challenging ground conditions. Very, very fast, you know, to get up. But then to secure them, it takes a little bit longer, but you can also pitch a tent and actually move it around a different location if you need be. So that's a big advantage of the freestanding design. Also, another advantage of the freestanding design, I mentioned in one of my other videos, is actually drying the tents. So you can actually pop a tent up in a spare room in the house, you know, to dry it, because it doesn't need to be guided out to be pitched, or even pop it up in the garage. I find, you know, with my Akto, I always have to fully pitch a tent in order to dry it, because I try and avoid separating the tents. Because if you attach the inner and outer, or detach the inner and outer, it just takes a lot of time to do that. So I've always been able to dry all of my tents, particularly the freestanding ones, just by pitching them somewhere and letting them dry quite naturally. So looking just at the fabrics and poles of the different tents. So the poles here at DIC 10mm. This outer fly sheet fabric is a 40 denier. The inner fabric here is 40 denier, and the ground sheet here is 100 denier, so extra durable fabrics on the black label Soulo. So the Unna here, the standard pole is a 9mm, but today in this I have a 10mm. Standard fabric here is a 30 denier for the fly sheet, and the inner of the tent is also 30 denier, and the ground sheet is 70 denier. And on the Akto, fabrics and poles exactly the same as Unna. So standard 9mm, but I have a 10 in it, and the fly sheet is 30 denier, the inner tent is 30 denier, and the ground sheet 100 denier, or sorry, 70 denier just on the red label tent. Now, none of my videos or tent comparison videos would be complete without a section on weather resistance, and when it's down to weather resistance, this black label Soulo is definitely where it's at between these three tents. Now, indeed, the red label Soulo as well, you know, would be superior weather resistance wise. There are a number of factors for that. The black label Soulo has 10mm poles. The black label Soulo has 3 poles, whereas the Unna has 2, and the Akto only has 1. So 3 poles supporting the structure are going to be stronger than 2 or 1 and that is supporting a structure of similar sort of size and volume. The Soulo also has more pole crossing points, you know, so for example, compared against the Unna poles only cross, it's a simple dome design. The Unna pole crossing points are only in the middle. Here you've got pole crossing points here, and also at the back towards the sort of windward side, which is the way that you're going to pitch the tent. Any of the Soulos also have a more aerodynamic profile than the Unna, for example, you know, so the Unna you can see here is actually quite wide, you know, at the bottom, and quite broad end to end, whereas the Soulos are actually narrower at their end, and they gradually get wider, so the wind is dispersed that little bit easier than what it would be on the Unna. So in the Soulo here from the side, you've got, you know, a pole which supports the structure, so if the winds are changing direction, a bit of an advantage here too with the Soulo. And the guy system, you know, where the pole is directly supported by the guy line, I think is slightly more effective than where it's attached to the pole sleeve. It's a bit more direct, attached directly to the guy line. From the side here, the Unna has a lot of unsupported fabric and lacks the pole that would be down the centre here on the Soulo, although it is guyed here, but it's always good, I think, to have a guy line. And the pole, so the Unna is a little bit more vulnerable to side winds. Now the Hilleberg Akto here is actually a little bit lower than both of the other tents, and again, if the winds were coming from the side, you've got good support here, and certainly when this is guyed out pretty tight, you've very good side wind support. The Akto is also relatively aerodynamic, going from low kind of to high over quite a large distance, as the Unna sort of gets from low to high a little bit steeper, which is obviously much better in snow loading, but not just as good for wind. Now finally, I suppose, just to conclude on weather resistance, you know, I have had my Red Label Soulo out in 60-mile-an-hour winds, measured 60-mile-an-hour winds, so the Black Label here is going to do even better than that. I've only had the Unna out in 20-mile-an-hour winds, and actually it did very, very well, and I've had the Akto out in 40-mile-an-hour winds. But at the end of the day, you know, if strength and wind stability are your biggest issues here, then, you know, the Soulo definitely has a clear advantage. So now looking at interior volume, I sort of thought what I would do is I would sort of just merge a couple of shots here, you know, of me just sitting in a tent in a similar position with the amount of space that I have. So now I'm obviously in the Soulo, or Black Label Soulo. Height-wise, I'm a bit restricted. You know, my head is sort of hitting here on the inner tent, and if I was to move forward, obviously it would catch the sort of vent cover. But this is the sort of space that I have just for sitting in the Red Label or Black Label Soulo. So now pretty much the same shot in Unna. I mean, I do feel here that I have a good bit more, you know, space, you know, around me, and sort of headroom. You know, the vent cover's not coming down, you know, as low. So there's a lot more height in the tent, and just that volume, you know, a sitting comparison, definitely, you know, much better in Unna. So now, before I even say anything, sitting in the Akto here, you can see here there's a big difference, you know, height-wise. I mean, the space, you know, isn't, you know, from with the door opening is actually very similar, you know, to the Soulo, but, you know, the height is the real thing, and there's nowhere where I can move to where I'm not like really badly bent forward into a bad sort of posture. So at the moment, you know, I really wouldn't be using the Akto for sitting up to do very much. I'd probably be lying down in it. So this shot here is really just demonstrating the vestibule space. This is an Osprey 70-litre pack, and I mean, it just fits in here so easily. There is so much room. I mean, obviously I don't have anything in my pack at the moment, but, you know, I can even push the pack up to there, and I can store gear in this area and store gear, you know, here as well. I mean, the pack just fits in here, and there is so much vestibule space and volume. So now I've got my pack in Unna. Not really much for me to say other than, you know, quite surprised. I haven't got the inner retracted or unclipped in any way, and there's plenty of room here for, you know, my pack. It could, you know, I can set things obviously on top of it, or storage wise it could sit on its side, and it still have, you know, a bit of space. So it is quite sort of, you know, manageable and a bit of a surprise. And finally here, obviously in the Soulo, a little bit more width, you know, at the sort of widest point, you know, than Unna. But you really notice the Soulo rapidly, because the ends are so narrow, you notice the vestibule rapidly coming into a triangle there, so it's hard, you know, the pack would really have to sit about here. If you start to try and push the pack in to the corner, you're really limited by vestibule space. Again, the side option just about works, so there's really, honestly, very little difference in the vestibule space between this and the Unna. I would say because of the design of the Unna and the width at the ends, you've got, you know, less width here, but it's actually wider at the point there. So, you know, the total volume in the Unna compared to the Soulo here is actually really, really good, if not better. So now I'm going to look at the interior volume on all three tents. So in the Unna here, I actually have two inflatable mattresses, both Thermarest Neowares. They are 181 centimeters long inflated, and inflated they're 51 or 52 centimeters wide, and they fit easily within the width of this tent. In fact, what I've done is I've moved the back one here just up, touching the wall of the tent, and this one here just gently touching the back one. And at the floor here, I've got about this much spare space, so that's really, really impressive, you know, width-wise, because at the end of the day, Hilleberg never built this as a two-person tent. So if I'm sort of to move a little bit over, obviously I'm pushed down towards the end of the tent so I can see the camera. You know, this is me lying pretty comfortably on my mattress here, and if someone else was kind of, if two people were in this tent and you were kind of like head to foot, you know, there's a reasonable amount of room. It's not the sort of thing you want to be doing all the time, because, you know, the sides of the tent are obviously pushing me across, you know, a little bit, both the sides and the end, you know, because of the actual dome design. But for one person, this is a complete, you know, a complete palace. So now I'm going to try and sort of help out tall users a little bit. As I said earlier, I'm 6'1". So I'm lying down now in a tent. My feet are just touching the inner, and that's the headroom that I have. Obviously, if my head's on a pillow, you know, it's coming up a little. It's close enough there. So it theoretically is quite long because it's 230 centimeters, but because it's dome construction, you know, it does start to come in quite quickly. Now, obviously, you can lie diagonally and things in the tent, but, you know, that's just your choice. And really, the last aspect of the inner is the fact that you can unclip the inner, and it's very, very easy to do. So, I mean, that's it, even just unclip there, which is kind of one corner. Now, if you've two people in this, it's not going to be as easy because I'm kind of limited by this carry mat here. But even with the two mattresses sitting there, I can pull that back to that point. I can unclip it more, and it really just, you know, and it can use, just depending on the wind direction, I could probably use either end as more sheltered, and this could be used for storage or for cooking if you need to. So now just in the Akto, first of all, there's absolutely no chance of getting two mattresses in here side by side, but to be fair, it's not designed as that. But it's a bit of a bonus actually for the Unna. So the thing here is that lengthwise, I think the Akto is really, really deceptive. And it's really just because the ends actually on the dome of the Soulo and the Unna, as soon as you add height to the inner, the ends are actually coming in because of the dome sort of shape. Whereas because at the foot end and the head end of the Akto, it actually goes like that. For a little bit, you gain more length, especially when you're lying on top of a mattress. So that's my feet, same position as in the Unna, just very, very gently touching the end of the tent. And the distance that I have to the end there is, is much greater. I mean, it really, really is. I didn't actually turn around on the side there, but I mean, there's a lot of distance between my head and the end of the tent. The only issue is obviously how close you like your head to be, you know, to the actual fabric. And for me, there's loads of elbow room and loads of really fantastic lying down space in respect of the actual floor footprint on this tent. But it's once you start to sit up or move where you're very, very limited, and you just have to bear that in mind. If you're not too tall, or else you're quite tall and really flexible, then it's maybe not so much of an issue. So lying on my back in solo, feet again just brushing lightly against the bottom of the tent, and that's just the head space that I have there. So again, not a tremendous amount at all, but I can manage it. So just a little bit on cooking here. Certainly in the solo, that can be done from a seated position. Now, if you're right-handed, this tent is orientated probably would suit someone a bit more left-handed wise. So if I was doing lying down cooking, I have to kind of manage like this, and it's a little harder for me because I am actually right-handed and I'm lying on my right side. But not really, too much of an issue. I do find it a little bit awkward, but you've easily enough space to actually do that. And obviously in Unna, no issues no matter what way I want to cook here, but again it's orientated for someone who is kind of right-handed, so I can lie down now and have room to work. Obviously I have the vestibule open at the moment, and I'll show you sort of cooking with the vestibule closed shortly. Now, one of the things you can actually do with the Unna is, even without detaching the ends, because this is quite long and it's relatively loose, you could actually without unclipping the ends, you could actually just put a peg in the ground there, as long as you don't obviously catch yourself on it when you're getting out or in. But that is an option. I thought actually you can get a pole protector sleeve just to add a wee bit of length and extra security to that if you have a thinner peg, but it won't actually go on over this one. But I mean, that's just an option there. You can maybe take it back even slightly to the side, and it's certainly pretty secure, but just be careful, with the ends of the peg, that it doesn't actually damage your ground sheet. But again, that just gives you so much more room. So what I've done now is I've just swapped the pegs over here. So this is actually one of the small Hilleberg V pegs, and the pole protector sleeve will just sit down over that. So I've got that at a good enough angle, and that's pretty secure. I mean, even if it came unsecure there, the cooker's well away from it. I'm not going to close the tent down completely because it's difficult for you to see, but that's the sort of space that you have there, and particularly with with the inner even just retracted back a bit, you have pretty good space to manage. Today for lunch break, just my favourite. I don't know if anyone else has tried these. These are soba noodles. My favourite style is actually the chili. I think these are just the classic ones, but they're just really very authentic, really spicy if you like that sort of food, and obviously not too expensive either. So I've just moved this back a little bit closer to the tent. I mean, still definitely just doable, but you probably would be better with the sort of more remote canister type, the stoves that are a little bit lower. So finally seated in the Akto here, a bit difficult for me to manage, but can kind of do it at a push. But definitely a bit easier to manage from a side position. So now I'm just going to talk briefly about modifications on each of the tents that I've made. Maybe did mention it earlier, but I would put a 10mm pole in here instead of a 9mm. The difference in weight is probably only about 50 grams for the Akto, and it just gives the tent a little bit more stability for that weight penalty. Now, to be honest, when this is guyed out from the side, whether it's a 9mm pole or 10mm pole, this is very stable due to the guying. But when you pitch the Akto end into the wind, which mostly you're going to do, the wind pushes down on the fabric like this and puts a lot of pressure on the top of the pole. And this top of the pole doesn't get support from anything. So it makes a real difference, the fact that you only need to do one pole to get an extra strength benefit on the Akto, because here then the top of the pole is much more rigid than what a 9mm pole would be. So I think it's a really worthwhile benefit. So now to modification on the Unna. Again, 10mm poles, weight difference I think about 130 odd grams. On the Unna though, I have actually added an additional guy line. Now admittedly it's a little bit short, but it just gives it a little bit extra stability. So if the wind's hitting the tent from the end here, your standard guy line is giving it good support. But then if the wind's maybe coming a little bit more side on, the pole is then supported by an additional guy line, you know, which will certainly help. Now, the only thing that I would say here is on this particular side of the tent, when you pull this across, you pull this sort of strap, you're pulling it across the actual pole sleeve. So if that's windy, that is actually going to rub. On the other side here, that's not going to matter as much because it's pulling the strap away from the pole. So it works really well, I think, on one side, but maybe not so well on the other. And finally, modifications to the Soulo. At the moment, I actually don't have any because I'm pretty happy with it the way that it is. Obviously, you can do things with lighter pegs and possibly lighter guy lines. If it's a red label Soulo, then you can modify it by putting in black label, you know, or 10mm poles. Now, what I would say is that the poles here are incredibly well supported. So even with the 9mm poles, because of the guying system is the poles are really well supported by the guys. So at this point, I don't think the 10mm make a massive difference because of the guy support. So weight and pack size. Hilleberg Akto 1.7 kilograms. Unna 2.3. Soulo black label 2.8. Soulo red label 2.4. So that's your weights. The Akto is obviously a bit lighter, not as big. Soulo is a bit stronger and a wee bit smaller, and the black label is obviously a bit heavier than the Unna. So the Unna there are 2.3 kilograms, and with the 10mm poles it just takes it up to just over 2.4. Pack size, Hilleberg kind of make their bags they're oversized, so you know they will compress differently than this. Standing up on their end, you know, it could just be the way I have them in the bags. The Soulo certainly is a bit, you know, they're all kind of like the same sort of height, but if you're looking at them there, the Soulo, you know, is a bit more sort of actual volume in it. So pack size, I mean, it's pretty much where you would expect it to be. The Akto is probably a little bit smaller than them all. The Unna would probably be next, and then the Soulo would sort of have the most pack size of the three. But that's it for your weight and pack size. How do I pick a winner between all of those tents? In reality, you can't. It just depends on the type of use that you're going to use the tent for. If your priority is lightweight and pack size, the Akto is your winner. It's 1.7 kilograms, so it's significantly lighter than both the other tents. And its pack size, just with it having one pole and just being a little bit smaller, you know, is smaller than both of the other two as well. The Akto is extremely easy to pitch. With one pole sleeve and pole and 6 guy points, it is up in an instant. Albeit it can be a bit more tricky to pitch on difficult terrain. The interior volume, and particularly for lying down, is actually very, very good, and the vestibule space is the best of all three tents. So the main drawbacks of the Akto are really just interior volume, and that's height. You know, it's difficult to cook sitting up, and if you're moving around in the tent a lot, your head is always going to be touching the roof. But the actual length of the tent, I have to say, is quite good, and when you're lying down on it, if you're not too worried about the roof being close to your head, then the side walls of the tent are far enough away so you don't really get much of a claustrophobic feeling. The Hilleberg Soulo will be the winner of this test if your priority is strength and durability. It is a black label tent, so it has more durable fabrics and poles. It has 3 poles, whereas the Unna has 2 and the Akto has 1. It is more aerodynamic, and it will handle heavy snow loads a little bit better than both the other tents. Under harsh conditions, the Soulo is a little bit more time consuming to put up, but you can put it up in any conditions due to the combination of pole sleeve and clip system. The 12 exterior guy lines and semi-geodesic nature of this tent also make it incredibly strong. The Hilleberg Soulo also has enough interior volume, it has enough height to be able to sit up when you're cooking, and when you're moving around the tent your head's not touching on the top of the tent, so you have enough height. So if you're going to go on trips, you know, where pitching conditions can be challenging, you know, because the tent is also freestanding, it's going to be really windy or it's going to be snowy, or you're doing an expedition where you're going to be relying on the tent for a long period of time, then the Hilleberg Soulo is definitely the way to go for the single user. if you just want a peace of mind knowing that you have probably the strongest tent that's been made, in my opinion, then it's another great choice to go for the Soulo Black Label. The Hilleberg Unna is the winner of this test. If your priorities do not lie in the weight of the Akto or strength of the Soulo, if your priorities are in a tent that is extremely versatile and is an absolute palace for one person, and will stand up to the type of conditions that most users will want it for, the Unna is a clear winner in this test. If also you make that modification of adding 10mm poles for 130 grams, you will contribute a fair bit to the strength of a tent. It is extremely easy to pitch and extremely fast to pitch. It is also freestanding, so you can pitch it and then move it around to a different campsite if needed. Again, I mean, I must highlight the interior space in this tent is absolutely fantastic for one person, and also it will sleep two, you know, relatively comfortably, provided that you're kind of like head to foot. The limitations of the Unna would simply be, you know, in my opinion, its vulnerability to high winds. I mean, even if you do support the poles here with additional guy lines, as I showed to you earlier, there still is a lot, you know, there's a lot of fabric here that is unsupported by any poles. And that's at the side and also at the end. You know, the end of the tent is particularly broad, you know, at the bottom, you know, so there's a large surface area for the wind to catch. But if you're not going to be camped on summits and you're maybe just going to camp a little bit below a summit and you've got shelter, and if you're using a tent maybe for motorcycle touring or for, you know, for kayaking, for bike touring, and you're going to be in this tent, you know, day after day on a trip, you know, this really is a fantastic choice because it is so versatile. When you pull that inner back, you've got amazing vestibule space. When you don't pull the inner back, you've still actually probably got enough vestibule space to manage. And interior volume for just being comfortable in, and the livability of a tent, you know, is easily the best of all three. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed making it, and these are three great tents, as I said earlier, and they're all fantastic for certain different types of camping scenarios. So until next time, stay safe, and I hope you're getting out camping lots yourselves.